Okay, welcome to J150, Introduction to Criminal Law. We are at week number 6 already. Week 6 actually is the point where we have completed just about to the end there. And so, not to the end, but to the halfway point, I should say. So you should be ready to gear it up, because we've got just 5 more weeks after this week, and then we will be done. So make sure you've caught up on all your assignments. Make sure that you are paying attention to the notes that I've put in on your comments on your assignments. And if you have any questions, hope you've reached out to me by email, phone, text. Not a lot of you have this quarter, but let me know if you need any assistance. Don't wait until too late in the quarter, and the quarter will be over before you know it. So let's just get started, and let's go over the assignments. Okay. All right, this I don't want to. Okay, I don't want to do that one. Okay, let's take, get rid of that. Okay, now let's share the screen. There we go. And now you see what you normally see, your course home, when you first open up your course. And you see my information about my name, of course, my cell phone number, and then the reminder. Feel free to email, text, or phone me any hour of the day except the 25th hour of the day. That's what I have indicated since the beginning of the quarter. To remind you that you're required to conduct research for all papers, and that means that the sole source of your papers cannot, should not be the textbook. You will lose 2 points right off of the bat. All written assignments should be in APA format. That means citations in the body of the paper and references at the end, not one or the other. So our lectures, as you can see from our sessions here, we're at 6. So we have 2 more lectures to go, week 8 and week 10. So now let's look at the announcement. Every week I encourage you to look at the announcement. I encourage you to look at the calendar and for all instructions for your assignments. Make sure you use your rubric that I provided to you in this course. I rely heavily on that rubric in addition to the comments that are in here. So here we are, 6th week. We're going to talk about crimes involving public health and safety, chapters 11 and 12 of criminal law and procedure. I've sent you already the PowerPoints and the additional information that you need. And then, so we're going to look at briefly offenses against the public order and health. And then I want to remind you that your discussion assignment, your initial post, is due tonight on USA Patriot Act. And remember again, your posts need to be on time. They need to be detailed, not just one-liners or brief comments. You will lose points for the content or lack of content, and you will see me give you a comment saying that your post needs more information, details, and content. Because I want to be able to see that you put some thought into it, maybe even a little research. And then, of course, your reply post is due this Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Finally, your written assignment, criminal liability for corporate officers, and then the quiz. Both of those are due by this Sunday, which you'll see in a minute when we look at the calendar. by 11:59 p.m. Okay? And then I remind you to continue to be strong and finish strong. And my motto, adversity as a springboard to success, should be something that you remember whenever you run into a problem. Don't just think of quitting or throwing in the towel. We all run into adversity. So now let's take a look at our course calendar. Here it is. And here we are right here with week 6. Then your initial post, then your reply post, then your written assignment that is due, and then, of course, your quiz. Now, I recommend doing the quiz on Sundays as a last assignment. Some do it early, but I recommend that you don't, because you have a chance to go over all the materials that I've been giving you, along with the reading assignment, and completed your initial post and reply post, and then your written assignment, because this quiz is 10 minutes, and you get basically 1 minute per answer, and you get 1 time to take it, and that's it. Okay, so now let's look at the module itself. Let's look at the assignments first. And here we go. And this is liability, criminal liability for corporate officers. And you're to go over these facts. And you're supposed to take these facts and apply them to answer the questions of what is the responsible corporate officer doctrine. Would this doctrine apply to David or Debbie? Please explain why or why not it doesn't, and the potential defenses, if possible, by either of the parties under the FDCA. So you want to make sure that you utilize and know that based upon having looked at that from your readings as well as from the module itself here. And reminder, it's a 2 to 3 page document. It's not a 1.5 page. I'm strictly going on the number of pages now. Also, make sure you run your papers through Grammarly. Critical for yourselves. You have Grammarly accounts. Make sure that when you run them through Grammarly that you're also indicating during your Grammarly run through that you cover plagiarism, so you can make sure that you don't have too much of the content of the sources that you discover from your research. You want to offset that and balance that off by including your critical thinking. Critical thinking applies to taking the facts and providing answers to the questions in your words, and also at the same time applying some ideas in the paper, so that I realize that you have actually gone through, did some studying and research. Never use Wikipedia. I've said this before. Only one student, I think this quarter, has used it in one of my classes. But never use Wikipedia. It is not acceptable. You will lose points right away for that, even if you have a perfect paper. It is an unreliable source. It is a Word document, and anybody can change it. So we don't accept that in the academic world as a reliable source for research. You have plenty of sources that are available to you under your Resources tab. If you go to your Library and Learning Center, and then also you can use the Criminal Justice page that I provided you at the beginning of the quarter that gives you sources, library sources, and things that will help you in your papers. And then this is your discussion post regarding the Patriot Act, and you're going to, of course, explain benefits of the act. Do they outweigh the general public? Is there some detriment to the Constitution? Explain your answers. Be sure to define what the act is and the impact on the Fourth Amendment, right to privacy, and those kind of things. Search and seizure. Primarily, right to privacy is involved, and then, of course, your quiz is involved there. Okay, and those are your assignments for this week. So let's look at the lesson content. Here's the lesson content here, and what we're going to cover. And again, repeats the reading assignment, and it tells the little section on offenses against public, water, and health, which is below here. Your written assignment that I just went over with you, and then your discussion post I just went over with you, and then your quiz. Okay. So this tells you about the act that's mentioned in one of your assignments here, so that you understand what the FDCA, which is the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and so you're going to understand what it does. You're going to also understand that this is a strict liability crime in many of these cases under the FDCA, and what that requires is no mens rea, no criminal intent, and that if you violate the act and it's determined that you violated the act, then there's no defense that I didn't know, I didn't intend to. Anyway, that's that. And then responsible corporate officer, which you need to know about for your assignment as well, and explains that as well. And then secondhand smoke, it talks about what the effects of that. And then, of course, the last part involves the Patriot Act, which you learn about that as well, because you're dealing with that in your discussion post. And then take the time to do this puzzle. And if you do the puzzle, it'll give you a score. A person who holds a supervisory position in an organization may be subject to criminal, corporate liability committed by subordinates. And so the answer to that applies in 1 across. So you will put that in the boxes for 1 across. So, and then it's a crossword puzzle, and it will help you too with the terminology to prepare for the quiz as well. Okay. So you want to make sure you do those. Okay. So now that's it for your assignments for this week. So now let's get right into the live lecture for the offenses against public health and the environment. The Industrial Revolution, which we are engaged in and been engaged in for a little while, it's been determined that we need to protect the public. And the way we protect the public health is by various types of laws relating to the water, the air, and it says littering, disturbing the peace or noise, anti-smoking laws, as you have come to learn in many areas, that there are anti-smoking laws that don't allow in restaurants and even nightclubs. I was interested to discover when I went to Vegas last year that apparently the anti-smoking laws hadn't reached the casinos. And so they still allow smoking, and that was one of the things that I'm not a smoker, I'm not even a gambler, but I went there, and it really created a problem for me because being not a smoker. And then the fact of the matter is that, as you probably already know, that being a non-smoker, there is the strong probability of a person getting cancer or getting sick from the secondhand smoke, and they end up with worse of the deal than the persons who originally are smokers. So anyway, in order to protect the public, there's anti-smoking laws in public places and things of that nature. At our campuses, Rasmussen College, we had a smoking section, but they did away with those. They, at least here in Illinois, they did. And you have to go either to your car or something like that, and maybe even have to leave the campus area for a smoke. But it's for the protection of everybody. For people who are smokers, they're not really that excited about it. But remember this, that we only have so much air, and then you only get one set of lungs that you're born with. People have lung transplants. I have a friend right now with my wife, and she is awaiting a double lung transplant, and it's not looking too good because of the fact that she wasn't a smoker, but the fact of the matter is that there are all kinds of carcinogens and things in the air that create those kinds of problems or increase the chance of a person running into lung cancer or some kind of other breathing problems. Congress and not the cities and the states deal with a lot of these laws on the federal level, but in some local jurisdictions, not the cities, but in the states. But it originated from Congress and cites not common law, but there were regulations that were passed, statutes. And so there are regulatory agencies like the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that involve and enforce these things, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And then, as I said earlier, these are usually strict liability crimes. And so again, strict liability crimes are crimes where the public offense, the main issue is that the person didn't comply with the laws and are considered as mala prohibita, which means that on their face, you violate the laws, then you end up with a conviction. And pretty much there are fines, some jail times, but sentences, but primarily big fines. Criminal responsibility based solely on the commission of the prohibited act, it is. For example, in the State versus Bud, it's a criminal offense to dispose of garbage, and we know this, in a ditch, a pond, or stream, because you're polluting the waters and the water supply. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and we talked about that earlier, prohibits traffic in food, drugs, and cosmetics prepared or handled under unsanitary conditions that render them injurious to the health. In other words, there's a standard that the Food and Drug Administration, in applying the FDCA, is involved with. And the main idea is to protect the public. It sets certain standards. I do know that there are some things that I don't even like that they allow. For example, I found out when I was teaching ethics in business that there is a company, and actually I'll just say it because it's already public, that Taco Bell, they are allowed to have their beef tacos be, I think it's 60% beef and 40% fillers. And they claim that the fillers that they put in are not dangerous or hazardous, but the government will allow it. And so my point being is that you need to be able to recognize the fact that you're getting those things. Of course, they put a disclaimer, but it's very quickly before the public. And you know already, you see things like, for example, if you go to buy juice, something that says juice, it has to say juice and at 100%, or either it's a juice blend, and then it'll say what items are used in the juice. My wife one time was trying to get some cranberry juice, and I told her make sure that she gets not the cocktail, because the cocktail indicates a mixture, but get the 100%. Look for the words 100%. And when it's 100% juice, then it has to be that. And if you don't have that, then you're going to violate this particular act. And also the same thing for drugs as well. Cosmetics, certain items that are used, certain things are used in cosmetics. Now let's talk about Coca-Cola. Some of you guys are not old enough to know about this, but this is an accurate and true thing. It says Coca-Cola was outlawed, or there was an attempt to outlaw Coca-Cola because it actually contained cocaine. When it said Coke, and the nickname for cocaine is Coke, then Coca-Cola was actually labeled Coke because it did contain amounts of cocaine, and at one point it was an excessive amount. So you think about that. The Coca-Cola people quickly replaced that after pressure, and replaced it with caffeine. But the Supreme Court ruled that the amount used was excessive. So they tried to reduce the amount of caffeine, and you know already they got these drinks now that have all other kinds of things in them. I was telling somebody once that the diet drinks are more dangerous to your body than the full regular drink. But anyway, the bottom line is, in this instance, just Coke agreed to reduce the amount of caffeine. And so the government, so the question is, do you think that the government should regulate what consumers eat and drink? I think so, because someone has to watch out for the well-being of the public. And then we got these drinks that people now are drinking that didn't exist when I was a kid, Monster and Red Bull. And what are the problems? Well, there was a number of problems with those drinks. It raises your heart. It does all kinds of things to people, it's discovered. And a lot of young people are drinking these in college and even now in high school, and there are even some grammar school kids. So there's some health hazards that go with that. And so eventually it's either going to be something that relates to some kind of regulation for Red Bull and Monster and these energy type drinks. There are people who have had heart attacks after drinking those. And the strict liability offenses, we talked about that. Violation of food and drug laws fall under what we call regulatory offenses. Criminal liability attaches without proof of intent. Now, if you're going to go to the felony level, because most of them are misdemeanors, then you have to provide specific intent. In other words, that person knowingly covered it up, and with willful intent, then we get to the specific intent, and we're not dealing anymore with the strict liability aspects of it. Some people say that these violations shouldn't be strict liability crimes because they say it label people as criminals who are without moral fault. Well, the question of morality and the law is kind of juxtaposed. It's debatable about whether morality is involved in many of our laws that exist today. The fact of the matter is that if the law is passed that says that you should not have a certain item in the food, or that it should be labeled properly so that people are aware of what they're ingesting, and that if there are some things that we need to protect minors from, then we need to take those steps. So, zoning ordinances, pretty popular. I, at one time, dealt in that. For the structures and buildings, certain buildings, they're what they call residential zone areas, so you can't have commercial buildings where there are stores and things in that area. But there's usually a local board in the community that handles that. And then most local ordinances take care of those kind of things, city, state, village, or municipality, whichever it's in. And there's usually some zoning board which handles the administration of these ordinances, or either they end up in civil courts and not so much criminal courts. The really serious problem that occurs in zoning situations is if you build in a situation where the area is not zoned for, you could have the consequences of having your property torn down or shut down, and you can't operate it in that area without going through the processes of getting the property zoned, or either obtaining an exception or a permit. Intent is not a requirement, okay? Environmental laws, we get to the Commerce Clause. Article 1, Section 8 allows Congress to enact laws to protect the environment, as I already talked about, and the agencies that handle those are like the Environmental Protection Agency, and then a lot of states have their own versions as well of those agencies that administer those laws. In 1899, the Rivers and Harbors Act declared the misdemeanor discharge refuse matters into any navigable waters, and the reason for that is because navigable waters meant that it went between the boundaries of multiple states or jurisdictions. So the federal government steps in under Article 1, Section 8 in interstate commerce. The Supreme Court held that the government can prosecute those who discharge refuse in the navigable waters in this case. Okay. The Clean Air Act, again, protecting our air, set standards for air quality, and we've already elaborated on the reasons for that. And people need air to breathe, and there are criminal sanctions for violations for falsifying documents. As you know, and I know, that we have vehicles in all jurisdictions I know of. We have to go through emissions testing every so many years to determine that the vehicles are satisfying the Clean Air Act that exists. And then also, there was years ago when I was a kid, there was regular gas, and that regular gas was not lead-free. And so now we've gotten to the point that unleaded gasoline is what's sold along with diesel, and now we got E85 as well, which is, again, supposed to be cleaner for the air as well. More, as they say, ecologically feasible in terms of protecting the air. The Water Act, we've talked about that a little bit, but this is a statute, again, operated under Article 1, Section 8, regulates industrial discharge in navigable waters. Navigable waters are only relatively impermanent standing water or flowing bodies of water. Prohibits discharge of pollutants from any source in those. That's what this case that was litigated about. And courts tend to hold personnel with supervisory functions to a very, very high standard. And the reason is because they will make money by discharging in steel mills, oil refineries, and other factories into the water. And then you have to turn around fish, will be in that water. You will catch those fish, eat the fish, and things like mercury and other kinds of poisonous things will enter into the human system through eating those fish, as well as plants that grow as well as, of course, that's a source of drinking water as well. This is an example of a deep water oil spill, Gulf of Mexico, down by Texas, where the oil spill flowed for 3 months. BP, this was a big one. Oil performed after an explosion in 2010 that killed 11 men and injured 17 others. The spill caused a lot of damage to the marine life, as I was talking about earlier, and the wildlife habitat, and destroyed the beaches, so the people couldn't even swim in the waters. So BP was held to the high standard and was sentenced to pay a $4.5 million fine. Now, somebody might say, that's extensive. Not for BP, it's not. Not for BP, it's not. So there were people who think that the fine was not adequate enough to deter that type of activities. Other consequences could have been the officers who were involved in the BP Corporation held to some criminal responsibility and be threatened with serving jail time. Resource and Conservation and Recovery Act details for hazardous waste, what penalties, fines, and then, like I said, it depends on how serious it is, up to 5 years in prison. And again, this relates to the individuals, to the corporations, the companies, those who are in high positions, the board of directors, and not necessarily the shareholders, but most of the time it's the actual board or the CEOs who are responsible and could end up in prison. States are encouraged and establish standards as well. Illegal actions include transporting hazardous waste to an unpermitted facility, storing, disposing, or treating hazardous waste without a permit, omitting material information, or making a false statement, in other words, lying about throwing or disposing of hazardous waste. As you know, and I know, in many jurisdictions now, it used to be that we used to have a situation where you could put a TV out on the curb and the TV would be picked up, computers and stuff like that, but no longer. You have to have special places where you get rid of those things. Some people don't even realize it, but even throwing batteries in the regular garbage is also a violation of those laws as well, because what happens is those chemicals that are in those items will go into the landfill and ultimately end up in the plants and sometimes in the water in the area as well. Toxic Substance Control Act prohibits the manufacture, distribution, and use of chemicals that present unreasonable risk to the environment and to regulate disposal of those chemicals. Primarily civil, but can be criminal, as I said a few minutes ago. Criminal liability of corporations. Foods, drugs, and cosmetics are produced and distributed by corporations. Corporate officers, as I said earlier, can be held accountable if they fail to supervise production and distribution, such as misbranding and things of that nature, allowing for certain items that are hazardous to the public to be included in those items, those drugs, or either in the cosmetics themselves. Remember, the cosmetics are being put on the bodies of people, and that it gets into the pores of the body and have been known to cause cancers and other illnesses. In the United States versus Park, Park failed to use his authority in operating the company to prevent food storage in contaminated places. So if you have some authority to stop it, you should stop it, or else you can be held criminally liable as an officer of that corporation. United States versus White, in which the Supreme Court stated that corporate officers can be held criminally liable for the acts of the corporation. There's a case for you to think about in terms of your written assignment. And in this case, Dodorich company purchased the drugs from various pharmaceutical manufacturers and put their own labels. And this was misbranding. So the court upheld this conviction, arguing he was responsible and needs to protect the public. And for what was, all he would say is that, oh, I didn't manufacture them, I just put my label on them. You become a part of the cover-up if you do. Noise pollution, we already know about that. Congress, of course, passed the Quiet Communities Act in '78. Many jurisdictions, states, and local governments enforce the law for protecting communities against noise, pollution. People who live in apartments or in close proximity of another may prohibit the use of loud audio equipment certain hours that there may be somebody having a party or picnic or something, and they use some kind of loud equipment. There are times even when, for example, parks, if you have an organization that has an event there, they have to get permits from the municipality or agency that administers that park or facility to use that audio equipment, and usually it's for the protection of the surrounding residents there. Supreme Court held that ordinances must provide a requisite clear notice and sufficiency definite warning of what that conduct is. So it must be very clear about what it is. Anti-smoking laws, we talked about that. Public places, airplanes, buses, schools. Even now, these electronic cigarettes are not allowed. Florida, though, enacted laws prohibiting smoking in restaurants and other public places. Exceptions are standalone bars. Punishments are fine. But many jurisdictions follow along with that. We here in Illinois have similar laws. New York's comprehensive smoking ban. People may not smoke in places of employment, indoor areas of bars, restaurants, subways, and numerous other enclosed areas. So where do you smoke? In your own home, in private areas. There is even non-smoking at athletic events. You go to the games and things of that nature at stadiums, and there's some smoking bans based upon the jurisdiction that the park or stadium is located. So what's going to happen with smoking bans? Some people say that it's unfair. There's some constitutional rights that smokers have. So anyway, they have been saying that there was some due process, equal protection issues, and the right of privacy. But all of those have fallen by the wayside in favor of protecting the public, and rightfully so. Protection of wildlife. State protects wildlife by regulating fishing. You can only catch so many kind of fish, and in public and private streams. And then the Migration Bird Act protects certain species of migratory birds from hunting. You do know that it is a federal offense to shoot or capture the bald eagle. It is something that could land you in jail, actually, and are very much protected under the laws. Endangered Species Act, designed to conserve, and preserve the wildlife and balance and so forth, imposes criminal penalties against persons who knowingly violate these issues, such as the nesting sea turtles. They become extinct and disappear. whale hunting. Whales were excessively hunted for their oil, used for food, clothing, and other products. And then technology made it easier to catch and kill the whales. In 1946, International Convention for Regulation on Whaling existed. And it's, again, the fact of the matter is, if it wasn't regulated, whales would disappear totally from our society. And that's it for that one. Okay. Let's go right into chapter 12. So, so now we're going to get to the issue of offenses against public order, safety, and national security. You and I both know that we're in a time now where terrorist activity is all over the place, and that the laws have to be passed, such as the Patriot Act, which we're going to talk about, to protect us, the public. The government has an obligation to protect the public and to make sure that you're safe. And so it's a criminal act to violate those. Government must also protect the security of the country, military forces, intelligence agencies, and the criminal laws themselves. So to the end, we come to the point of recognizing that our country is vulnerable to attack by terrorists. And so the laws now are put on the books and to protect the public, from the attacks. As you and I both know, that whenever there is a major event, the Super Bowl we just had it Sunday, there were so many armed officers, you couldn't even fly over without permission of the Federal Aviation Authority, because of the fact that there are attacks from the air. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of things have changed in the last 16 years, and we're going to elaborate on that in just a minute. Crimes against public order are rooted in common law, including breaches of the peace, inciting a riot, disorderly conduct, and noise ordinances. It would be that if 3 or more people met together with the intention of cooperating to disturb the public peace, it was considered as an unlawful assembly. That's that common law. If they took steps to achieve their plan, it was a rout. And if they executed their plan, it became a riot. So this is under common law. However, we have moved from that to breaches of the peace under laws that are passed, statutes, codes, regulations, federal, state, and local laws, primarily to protect the public, prohibit unlawful assemblies and riots and disorderly conduct. There is some debate, though, between keeping peace and the First Amendment rights, like the right to free speech and assembly, may be restricted only where necessary to achieve a compelling public interest. In other words, you can restrict a constitutional right, but it has to be the burden of the government under the First Amendment is to make sure that there is no other way to do this, or it is the best possible way to protect the interests of the public from attacks and dangers. That's what some of the laws that we're going to talk about come about. The United States Supreme Court in 1983 stated that the First Amendment rights to free speech and assembly cannot be restricted on the sidewalk in front of the Supreme Court because the sidewalk is not a part of the court. So what happened is that this person had been told by police that according to 40 U.S.C.A., this is Chapter 40, United States Code, that she could not hold up her sign displaying the text of the First Amendment on the sidewalk in front of the Supreme Court. Well, this is an unconstitutional statute because all she's doing was holding up a sign. The statute was declared unconstitutional on the basis that the First Amendment cannot be restricted on public grounds. It was no danger or anything. The person was merely expressing their First Amendment right. So we're not going to go that far. But the Federal Anti-Riot Act says that in people traveling across state lines or use the mail, telegraph, radio, or television, and now you can add the internet or cell phones or any of those kinds of things with intent to incite, encourage, participate in, or carry on a riot, or to aid or abet any person in inciting or participating in a riot could be a violation of that act. The act has been challenged. In 1972, the Supreme Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, which is the circuit where we are located in here, held that the Anti-Riot Act is not unconstitutionally vague or overly broad because it set out what type of activities were prohibited very clearly. Now, here is an attempt to control a group where the Supreme Court reversed the conviction of students convicted for breaching of the peace. And what had happened is that the students had been making speeches, singing, African-American students. The police asked them to disperse, and then they did refuse to disperse or stop. The court argued that the students were peaceably expressing their opinion. The 14th Amendment does not permit the state or make criminal the peaceful expression of an unpopular view. So you can express your views. I happened to hear the other day in two of our communities, I think it's Park Forest, Illinois, and I think Manteno, Illinois, there was material being passed out where the Klan was attempting to recruit people. And it disturbed the people in the community because both of these communities contain, especially Park Forest, a melting pot of people from all ethnic groups and backgrounds. But and so the police were given that information, and so it was stated very clearly that as long as it didn't reach the point of hate crime, where they were trying to target a certain group with passing these materials out, but instead they were soliciting membership, that because of the fact that they were in plastic bags and thrown on the ground, they could be charged for littering. Now, that could possibly end up going up to the courts, to the Supreme Court even, to argue, is that individual really being prosecuted for what their information is, or littering in itself. And because probably littering is a strict liability crime, then it would probably prevail. Here's Occupy Wall Street. I remember this in 2011. Occupy Wall Street movement started September 17th, where protesting social and economic inequality and perceived undue influence of financial and other corporations. The protesters gathered in Zuccotti Park, located in New York's Wall Street area. Police forced them out of the park. In November of 2011, FBI and DHS monitored Occupy Wall Street as a terrorist threat because in group situations like that, it's been determined that there are groups that take the opportunity to exercise their terrorist activities in those kinds of environments. So the police put up barricades, which were pushed back by the protesters, and then arrested. So the question here is, the protesters were breaching the peace. Here's the problem again, with the times that we're in and with the laws that have been put on the books for the protection of the public, and how terrorist activity can take place. Like, for example, the Boston Marathon bombing situation is a good example. And then there are other instances where there are public events where these kinds of things happen. And so the law is there because there have been tendencies demonstrated where there have either been some attempts that took place or there were preparation for attempts to take place that the authorities were able to quash before they got off of the ground. It's the times that we're in. Vagrancy laws. Vagrancy laws in feudal England refer to being without visible means of support or being without employment and being able to work but refusing to work. Well, in the 1800s, the American states started defining this as vagrancy. And in by the 50s, it was limited to alcoholics and derelicts. In 1972, the Supreme Court ruled the statutes were too vague, most of them, but most states continued their practice against homeless and alcoholics for many years. It still exists even today. I'm aware down in Florida, for example, that there was a pastor who was feeding the homeless, and because he was feeding the homeless, they prosecuted him, saying that he was encouraging people to be homeless, which I thought was kind of, it didn't make sense to me. People don't become homeless because they want to. People become homeless because their circumstances have put them in that position. And so the real deal was, though, is because many people of wealth retire in those areas. That was what that really was all about. And arguments were made to that point. And depending on who the judges were that were involved in the cases that were heard, then the rulings went one way or the other. That still is an ongoing thing right now. Papa Christou versus the city of Jacksonville. The Supreme Court stated that the vagrancy statute was so vague as to lead to an arbitrary arrest and conviction for vagrancy. Person had been convicted for violating the vagrancy ordinance. So if it's vague, it's used to prosecute a person who's fallen on hard times. That's not good, and probably going to be unconstitutional. Loitering. After this case, Papa Christou, the states began to enact new laws so they could fix those things, focusing on preventing crimes such as prostitution. Several cities and states enacted ordinances against loitering, but many of those were vague as well. Loitering laws have to focus on the conduct, not the person's status or association. And then I was talking about this earlier, homeless people in Florida is a violation of law to overnight in public places, and that was what the whole issue in a nutshell was that I was talking about a few minutes ago. This I remember extremely well. Let me say this, the intention of this law was to attempt to regulate and control gang activity. And but the Supreme Court, it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court in 1999, held that the gang congregation ordinance was unconstitutional. And what had happened is that the police were allowed to arrest anyone they reasonably believed to be known gang members loitering in a public place. And justified or just unjustified, the fact of the matter is that many times the purpose for the gathering was to prepare some type of activity. But the court said, we can't do that. Said the ordinance was unconstitutional because it did not specify what specific behaviors. In other words, it had to be more specific, and it failed to give notice. So what had to be done is that this ordinance needed to be rewritten. My recollection is that they've attempted to rewrite it, but they still keep challenging it time after time. Panhandling, before Papa Christou, vagrancy laws regularly included ordinances against begging. But after the court invalidated the vagrancy laws, cities enacted new ordinances against begging, which were called panhandling. Well, the Supreme Court has not taken up this issue, and we wait for the Supreme Court to give some definitive ruling on it. And the state courts have typically struck down ordinances against begging in the public, and that as a result, the point of the matter is that the people were they were being prosecuted for their status, and so these laws have become very weak, and you don't run across that too much. You see panhandling taking place all the time. Motor vehicle violations, strict liability offenses such as speeding. If you know the sign said 60 and you were doing 61, or you know, I remember when I was a village prosecutor years ago, a person came to court, and the person said to the judge, no, the judge asked the question, were you speeding? And the person says, no, I wasn't. They said, I was doing 40. And the person said, the judge said, reminded the person that the posted speed limit in that area was 35. And the person said something that a lot of people thought existed. What about the 5 mile over rule? There is no such thing as the 5 mile over rule. 35 means 35. And so that person complained and said that, well, other people were speeding. So the judge says, well, you're the one that got caught and you're representing the group, so therefore, you know, how do you plead and so forth. So anyway, the bottom line is that it's strict liability offense. Same as wearing a seatbelt. Those are for safety. Texting while driving, also for safety as well. And then the 80s rules of road made traffic rules more uniform across the country. But there are still many differences, such as the speed limit. The speed limits, I remember I was down in Oklahoma City some years ago, and I was working for a janitorial company at that time, and they had a vehicle that they wanted me to have up here for my district, for my people to use. So I flew down there to get that vehicle, and then I was driving it back where I hit the highway in Oklahoma City, and I was driving along doing 60 miles an hour, and people were blah, 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 and they were blowing, because I was trying to be careful. I said, I'm far away from home. I don't want to get a ticket. Well, some of you probably already laughing hearing this because you already know where I'm going. Well, actually, the speed limit was 70 at that time there, and 70s hadn't reached up north. You would drive. So anyway, you could drive 70 till you got to 44 up to St. Louis, and then you left St. Louis 44, crossed over, and you took 55, I-55, which is a highway that takes you past where I'm living now. But at any rate, the speed limit changed and reduced, and across state lines, man, there was the state police, like the welcoming committee, waiting for you to come across that line speeding. So the bottom line was that you couldn't say, well, you know, I just left a 70-mile-an-hour speed limit. They said, yeah, but now you're in a 60, and so you're getting a ticket. So anyway, it's strict liability, the bottom line. Decriminalizing of criminal offenses until 60s. Most offenses were misdemeanors. Offenses are not a crime, but civil infraction, and you end up resolving those in traffic court. You get, though, to the seriousness when you get into driving under the influence of drugs, alcohol, and so forth and so on. Gun control, hot potato. More than 300,000 violent crimes were committed with firearms in 2008. The Second Amendment protects the right to bear firearms, and people who are mentally ill or have a felony record are excluded from this right. state and the federal government have right to impose gun regulation laws. I came up with a study that was done by the University of Chicago on Chicago and guns, and I shared that with some of my students in other classes. I'm going to send each of you a copy of that report, and you can see. The bottom line is that gun control is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. The only issue is how far. And so the question of background checks and concealed weapons, to carry concealed, and the whole 9 yards. But I would say to you that depending on which side that you're on, gun control or opting for the Second Amendment right of people to bear arms, you will find that in the urban areas that there's more gun control because of the numbers that take place. Again, I will send you that as soon as I finish this lecture along with the archive. Firearms in 2012, these are some examples where people who advocate gun control went on a rampage, killing 26 people at Sandy Hook in Connecticut. The victims included the person's own mother, 20 children, 6 teachers, administrators. After the incident, many Americans armed themselves for self-protection. Again, the debate continues. And so the issue about the Second Amendment versus gun control will go on and on and on. And I said this before, and I'll say it again, that your position will be determined by your personal experiences in life. If, for example, there are people who have actually been the victims of handguns, and their family members, they opt on the side of gun control, even if they were on the Second Amendment side. Then there are some people who, even after that, they are more adamant with the Second Amendment side. But there are a whole lot of variables that are involved there, and we're not going to get into all of those. But be aware there is a debate, and you're well aware of that. Offenses against national security. So now we get into the issues of treason, which we don't run across a whole lot, making war against one's own government or aiding and comforting enemies. No one has been convicted of treason since World War II. We have a tendency in this country not to want to be close friends with our enemies or countries that are not friendly toward us. There's some debates about that going on right now with the current administration. And the fact of the matter is that since as long as I've known in history, we have, for example, I'll use Russia. When I was a kid coming up, I remember Nikita Khrushchev and his famous phrase, "We will bury you." I remember growing up as a kid and remembering what Stalin did. I remember growing up as a kid and remembering the impasse in 1963 with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was very, very, very serious. And if you do some research on it, you'll see that Russia had armed and supported in conjunction with Cuba, had planned to, and had actually, this wasn't pretend, missiles pointed at our major steel cities. I lived in Gary at that time, and we were telling our classmates goodbye that night. We were in 6th grade. Now, here's some 6th graders saying this, and we were eminently concerned. But then President John F. Kennedy, in a historical move, sent out forces to turn those people around and thus save the country. Literally, there's been movies that have been done about it. You can always Google and you'll find those were some very imminent, very real things. Well, we are still subjected to those things right now. I was in Fairbanks, Alaska 93, 4, 94, 5, 6, and 97. And a couple of those years, some people were up there who were retired military people, because there's several bases. There's Fort Wainwright, Allison Air Force Base up there, and then there's some more. But anyway, my point being is that we were in the air flying in a twin-engine plane, and one of the guys pointed out to me an area that we could see clearly, off in the not far distance. He said, "You know what that is?" And I said, "No." They said, "That's Russia." And I said, "Oh my God." Russia was literally contiguous to Alaska. And that explained why, when I was a kid, there was a movie called The Great Race. And I could not understand how the race was from the United States over into Europe. And what happened is that there was an area, a little straight area, that they were allowed to drive through. This was in a movie now. But what I'm pointing out is that that was real, that there was actually land. We are attached literally by our borders to the Siberian portion of Russia. But the point of the matter is that it is. So anyway, we're very, very close. And today, not to, as I say, to limit the seriousness of attacks that can take place. Anyway, espionage, the crime of turning over state secrets to a foreign government. Intelligence Identifies Protection Act of 1982. The government, the CIA, and now we have the Homeland Security Agency to watch over the FBI, the Secret Service, and other letters of the federal government are watching over. Offenses against national security include sabotage, the crime of infiltrating and destroying a nation's war-making capabilities by sharing war secrets. The way that military, there was a couple of people who were convicted, military people, of sharing secrets. Mandatory 30-year prison sentence. Sedition, the crime of advocating or working toward the violent overthrow of one's own government. You don't hear a lot of that much more now because of the laws that exist on the books, like the Patriot Act. So now, combating terrorism. We've come to the point, as I said, where we have become vulnerable in the United States. The closest terrorism that existed for many, many years was in 1941, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and that led to World War II, and that led to the incarceration of Japanese people, and the famous case of Korematsu, that I can't think of the full name of it, but Korematsu is the name of the case, which we studied in constitutional law. But anyway, terrorism involves inflicting terror on populations through the indiscriminate killing. It's not who you're killing. You're just killing people to make a political statement. And destruction of property, often with explosive devices. This is what happened at the Boston Marathon. However, though, before all of that happened in the 90s, 96, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act came about because of the Oklahoma City bombing. Now, we talk about terrorists and we talk about people coming into the country. It was totally two American citizens who, Terry Hake, I think was one, and I can't think of the name of the other one, but anyway, Terrence Hake. But anyway, the point of the matter is that the Oklahoma City bombing took place in Oklahoma City, and it was a federal building, and there were people and kids that were killed because there was a daycare center there. And I'm looking up something. Oklahoma City. Here we go. the Oklahoma City bombing, bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, April 19th, 1995. And the individuals, Timothy, I'm sorry, I had the wrong name. Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols were the ones responsible for it. And so there's all kinds of things you can Google and you can check that out. But both of these people were convicted under the act, and they were both convicted of terroristic activities. Timothy McVeigh was born in the United States, Lockport, New York, and he was executed in 2001 by lethal injection. And then Timothy, let's see, that's Timothy McVeigh, and then the other guy, Terry Nichols. Terry Nichols was born in Michigan, and he went by different names, but he ended up, he's incarcerated 106. His penalty was 161 sentence of life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. So he's still in prison. My understanding is, I haven't heard anything about him dying. But the point of the matter is that there was a number of issues that were involved. There were some conspiracy theories, and the government was monitoring, and it was said there were additional conspirators. There were other individuals who were arrested and so forth. So the fact of the matter is that this was one of the big ones. There was also some that took place in New York City as well, but those were not at the extent. But this one right here was the landmark before September 11th bombing of the World Trade Center. So then we come to the attack on September 11th that we'll never forget, changed the world in the United States as we know it. It turned it into a totally different thing. We operated on the basis of, there were weekly, if not almost daily, flags flying to let us know certain colors, let us know how much we were under attack. And there were arguments saying that the government was actually not telling the truth about some of the things. But the fact of the matter is that the laws that came about, the Patriot Act, prohibits the support for terrorist organizations inside and outside. It began to be made clear that you couldn't just monitor the inside, but you had to work in conjunction with other allies to deal with terrorist activities in other parts of the world. And you know, there right now are so many issues involved with ISIL, and there have been other terrorist groups that are across the country, across the world, and be aware, though, that and that there's recruitment of young people from high school. There was a couple of young kids that were recruited by Al-Qaeda out of Aurora, Illinois, right here. And they went to school in Illinois. There were people in the military who were considered as. Every time something happens, the incident that took place at Fort Hood, and also at, I can't think of the other base where things happen. But the fact of the matter is that anytime something of a big nature happened, the incident that happened down in Orlando, San Bernardino, California, and so many instances. Of course, the Boston marathon at the marathon. What happened with those two young men, and I considered a terrorist attack as what took place in North Carolina at that church, when those people of African American ancestry were killed by this young man, and this young man now has been sentenced to death, and his name is Roof, his last name is. But I look at those as terrorist activities. So our terrorist activities, we have a lot of homegrown activities that take place. There's organizations like the Nazis and the Klan who operate under a lot of different names. There's all kinds of anti-Semitic groups that are around. And so these are forms of terrorism. Yes, we have some issues border-wise, but we have a lot of things that happen internally in the United States that involve so-called, quote, loyal citizens who have joined other forces to create violent attacks that are terrorist. So anyway, September 11th, U.S. Patriot Act is there to support for terrorist organizations outside the United States, and then racketeering and fraud in connection with certain cyber crimes. We're dealing with the wiretapping acts. We're dealing with the mafia. I always used to tell people that organized crime was terrorist activities. You know, and so then we talk about possession of biological weapons, weapons of mass destruction, a term that, you know, went around for a long time. And, you know, there are things that people can do now with the technology that exists and with the knowledge scientifically that there are governmental agencies outside the United States and in the United States that operate. There are some individuals who have the capability to be able to produce biological weapons. And so because we are dealing with those kind of things, there are some very serious issues of law that are there to protect the public. Allows for civil forfeiture and general secret warrants and searches. Now, there are arguments that there are violations of the Fourth Amendment, and I have already said this to many people, that the Patriot Act is a very voluminous act. However, the spirit of the law is designed to have us to, there's a compelling interest for the government to protect the citizenry of the United States from attack from terrorists, and foreign and domestic. And so we have to be careful not to be just focusing on the foreign, but we got the domestic as well. And like I said again, many of our attacks had to do with the September 11th. Okay, it was said to be foreign, but Oklahoma City was domestic, and also Boston Marathon was foreign. However, the point of the matter is that there is some assistance from people in this country itself who are already citizens here who allow those kind of things to take place. And so anyway, the argument is that, well, it violates our privacy rights. I would opt to give up some of my privacy rights. And as I said to someone, the only people who should be concerned about Patriot Act violations are those who are up to terrorist or criminal activity, and period. And that's it. That's it. Combating piracy, aircraft piracy. You know what I'm talking about, where planes are seized and forced to fly in different places. Some of our crashes. One of the first things that they look at is whether there was some aircraft piracy, the threat of force or violence, or any other form of intimidation. includes civil, commercial, and private and military aircraft. Naval piracy is robbery at sea, carries a life sentence as the maximum penalty. And then these are some examples of naval piracy. And we were talking about combating weapons of mass destruction a few minutes ago, weapons that are designed to kill large numbers of people, nuclear. Now, listen to me. In wars past, I'm talking about major wars. I'm not talking about Gulf War. Like the Gulf War, and even in Vietnam, they had Agent Orange, which was a chemical weapon. And there were many people who came back from war who were permanently damaged because of that. Of course, though, there have been many theories that there were people who were MIAs and they were not dead. They were alive, but because they were so affected by some of the chemical weapons that they weren't allowed to come back. And eventually they were placed in places or islands that the government knew. And some people said, well, those are theories. No, there's some truth to that. But the fact of the matter is that there's been chemical weapons involved in the war, which nuclear, radiological, biological. And what I am saying to you this is that I pray that we don't have another world war. The third world war, if it takes place, will involve all of these different kinds of weapons, and there will be people that will die. If you even go back to the bombing at Hiroshima and what happened to some of the people. And the bottom line is that now there's more sophisticated nuclear capabilities. There's all kinds of issues. The governments have signed documents that say that they will not generate these weapons. I don't trust our enemies in terms of that. And I'll just go out and say it, Russia included, because how close they are to us. But the fact of the matter is that we are in a society and a time now where, because of the fact that weapons of mass destruction can be developed because of the technological and the nuclear systems and methods that people have learned. There's some stuff that I don't know, you don't know, we don't know, that the government knows already and is aware of. The bottom line is that we're in a perilous time, much worse than we had in '63. I was talking about much worse during the Vietnam War with the Agent Orange and all of these other kinds of things. Anyway, the threat of using weapons of mass destruction is a criminal offense. The only problem is that if mass destructions are used, it kills so many or hurts so many people that it's hard, and even the people who do it, they have almost like a kamikaze mentality. For those of you who are too young to understand that term, kamikaze referred to the Japanese fighter pilots who would take off and they didn't have landing. They didn't have landing gears. Just kind of like almost the people that crashed into the World Trade Center. If you paid close attention to what they discovered, is that these people learned how to fly the planes and take off, but they didn't learn how to land because that wasn't their mission to land. The point was is that they were willing to die for the belief of what they were involved with, and that they were committed to it and give up their lives. You should be aware that one of the things that happened in Vietnam, and people would tell you Charlie would look like a little kid. That would be the enemy. And little kids, even in Iraq and Iran, these little kids, they would have bombs and all kinds of things on them, on their person, that was strapped to them by adults. And the kids were sacrificed to kill others. The fact of the matter is those kind of things are still in existence, even right now as I speak, if not worse. Johnny Wise and Jack Abbott Grebe were convicted for threatening to use biological weapons. It is a serious offense to threaten to use biological weapons. You remember the anthrax issue. You remember what happened with, I can't think of his name, but he was from Elmhurst, very brilliant guy. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but this guy was the Unabomber. He was a Unabomber, was sending bombs through the mail and stuff like that. And like I said, anthrax. These were chemicals that were put in the mail, so when people opened up their envelopes, they would ingest this, and it would kill them or seriously injure them. Immigration offenses. Right now, we're in the heart of dealing with those kinds of things right now as I speak. The courts are litigating an executive order signed by the president. But immigration offenses involve violations of criminal provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act, a federal law that relates to immigration. Congress has authority over immigration, and it says most immigrants come over the southern border. I don't know where that statistic is coming from. I don't know why that's even in here, because I don't know who has taken the numbers and so forth and so on, unless that's just a comment that the people that are the fastest growing population in America is Hispanic. I don't know, but the fact of the matter is that there are political differences between the parties and have hindered the unified approach toward illegal immigration. I was talking to someone the other day, and I was discussing with them the Dreamers. The Dreamers are kids who were illegally brought into the country when they were little, and they grew up and became adults. The people were allowed to live in this country, and they were raised up here, and they never really became citizens, and they could not do a lot of things, like, for example, get student loans, increase their education, but have been contributing to the country by working. And I'm not even talking about people who've gotten in trouble, but people who have been in the country for many years. There's some things in our country that is very clear, is very, very clear. This political bipartisan debate over immigration needs to be fixed. It needs to be resolved. And, you know, I will just say this: we are a country of immigrants. The United States is a country of immigrants. And I don't know what the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island represented, but I was taught coming up that it was welcoming people for a better life. I'm just saying, and, you know, people have their different arguments and debates about it. I don't debate with people unless I'm in an environment where I'm supposed to be espousing a certain position or attitude. Obviously, you can see that I feel that America is a country where people come for opportunities, all ethnic groups, and so forth and so on, and that the people who were originally here were the Native Americans. And I actually was telling someone this recently, that if you study the history of the Native Americans, you will find that Mexicans and the Native Americans are descendants of the same people. That's some knowledge and research. The bottom line is that it's in limbo now. It's a major deal breaker in this country. It prevents our country from uniting. coming together, and it needs to be fixed. And that's my comment or statement. Well, that's about all I got. And so I am going to adjourn this session for the night. I hope that you have gathered some information that will help you. You took off tonight. Maybe you didn't think this was a very important topic, but it is. Every one of these are very important. And by the way, those of you working in law enforcement at the various levels, particularly if you're heading toward, there are people who still want to be FBI agents, Homeland Security, you want to work in the prisons and other things. Some of these things tonight that we discussed, especially in this second section, Chapter 12, are very, very important to consider. So at any rate, there will be no lecture next week. The next one will be week 8. And until then, I'm going to say good night to you.